What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that gives leadership its close-up. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even Clive Lewis. He was running to be leader of the Labour Party, you know. No, me neither. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make the world work. We discuss everything from the latest news from the Brussels Trade Commission to the newest research in the world of nuclear fission, and of course the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Sally Dolan, Director of Culo Salus. The Scotland-based organisation provides safe, therapeutic, caring environments for children who have attachment problems as a result of adverse circumstances and emotional trauma in their early years. Sally leads the Culo Salus team, who use a model of practice based on attachment and trauma theory, and is informed by current research findings in developmental psychology and neuroscience. We discuss this and the sector more broadly with Sally now. Sally, welcome.
Hi.
Well,
nice to talk to you.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us today. And I thought it might be a wonderful place to get started. It's been a few months, obviously, since Culo Salus has been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know how you and the team are and what you've been up to.
Yeah, well, delighted. Yeah, well, we were very thrilled to be included in the Parliamentary Review, and love the article. And we have given the article out a lot to the various local authorities and professionals that place children with us, and people have been very complimentary about the article, and you know that we were included in the Parliamentary Review. So that was very good.
Well, I'm sure.
It's a very
So I'm sure you agree, Sally, the great challenge is, only summing up what you do in only 1,000 words.
Absolutely, yes, and it was very interesting. Your colleague who helped me do that, it was quite a task actually, because we do, it's such a big organisation in terms of what we do, and we've got the care side of things, we've got the education, and we've got the therapeutic support. So it's very difficult. We've now been going for 15 years, so we have quite a history behind it.
Absolutely. Go ahead, sorry, Sally.
Since you were asking what we've done since the review, one of the biggest things that happened to us last year was, as you know, we have a school, Northview House School, to which all our young people who are resident with us attend on a daily basis. We had a very big inspection from the Her Majesty's Inspectors of Schools, HMIE, as they're called in Scotland, and that goes on for about 3 days, and we have 4 inspectors in, so it's quite an intense experience in such a relatively small school, but very pleased to say we did extremely well in it. We were measured on 2 aspects, 2 quality indicators: learning, teaching and assessment, and raising attainment and achievement, and for both of those we got very good.
Fantastic.
And that is it.
There's so much to be proud of there, and I know that's something we'll talking about the school in a little bit more detail soon. But I can only imagine really just how stress levels must be running high for those 3 days.
Yeah, it was extremely stressful. I mean, to be honest, it probably took everyone till about the summer holidays to recover from it. But the team were excellent, and the report that is available on the website, the HMI website, is a very good reflection of the school, covering all aspects of it, and the aspects of it they highlighted in the report. I think it's a very good flavour of what we do, and in particular highlighting the very strong relationships that exist between the education staff and the care staff. And very often in a world like ours, working so closely together, that can be quite difficult to achieve. But, from the comments they made, I think we've managed to get that right. And one of the comments that they made was the outstanding ethos and culture across the school that's leading all our children to have high levels of attendance at school and good behaviour within the school and engaging very well in their learning. So, and from that, we actually appeared in a couple of newspapers with photographs. So it was a good end to our school year and very good for all the staff, both from the care side and education.
Very proud of that, and that's something for those who are interested. We'll certainly link the Inspectorate's report with the podcast as it goes out. And I know that, obviously, unless my Latin is completely failing me here, Sally, but of course, Culo Salus is care and safety. Yes, it's very much at the heart, of course, of what you do. You work, and for those that may be a little unaware, of course, working with children, many of whom have suffered severe emotional trauma. What would you say, Sally, in your experience, what are some of the biggest misconceptions with working with children that you do are?
Well, I think you're right. You mentioned that her name, Culo Salus, and yes, it does roughly mean to look after and to heal. It's our translation of it. And that the look after part is from the Scottish, what these children have in terms of a social work order. They're called looked after and accommodated young people. So we picked up that name, but we've said to look after and to heal. And just as a minor funny aside, we get quite a lot of variations on that name. And one of the sort of most amusing one was Culo Salus, completely on a letterhead, which was quite something. But yes, there's a lot of misconceptions about these children. And probably the biggest one is that it's their fault, that the behaviours that they display, the attitudes, just their whole general being, the fact that they can't control their emotions at all. Lots of people that are not fully involved in this world just think that almost it's bad behaviour, and they don't realise that their behaviour is a result of the very serious trauma, neglect, abuse that they've received in their early life. I would say there's probably, in the 15 years that we've been going, the words ACE, the adverse child experiences, and things like social media platforms like Twitter have probably done quite a bit to spread the word about children like ours, and that their behaviours are a result of their serious trauma, their lack of attachment. So there's probably more discussion on social media that helps to make people in the wider communities understand the behaviours of these children. And
I hope, and you're spot on, I think, with that point there, Sally, as compared to just 10 years ago, I think people's awareness of that it's increasing and is only becoming better explained to the wider public, and hopefully that's something we can continue to look forward to as we move on. And you've already mentioned, in fact, Sally, of course, founded now 15 years ago. So first of all, congratulations on that fantastic milestone. But in that time, science, research, it's progressed so much. What do you do to follow? Which model, I should say, do you follow in delivering the care, and how has it changed over those years, Sally?
Well, I would say we probably haven't changed it greatly, because when we first started, that was the kind of what we were following. Thinking about attachment, thinking about trauma. That's the language that we were speaking. And sometimes when we spoke to people, we talked at that point of, they had done some brain studies even back then that showed the differences in brain development of normal children, normal inverted commas, and children who have experienced trauma. But now there's much more sophisticated, as you say, that I'd say neuropsychology has brought that very much into the open and is able to show and demonstrate more clearly that is the reality, that the children that we're dealing with, their brains are wired entirely differently. And it takes a lot of work, a lot of patience, and a lot of support to make a change in their behaviour and to kind of allow them to develop relationships that will see them into their adulthood.
Absolutely, I know.
So I would say that's a major change. There's a lot more out there and it's disseminated much more widely. Because I remember at the outset when I used to tell, the placing authorities about that, sometimes, you were giving new information. I would say nowadays that's the biggest change. We're all kind of saying the same thing.
And I think you summed that up quite nicely in the review itself, Sally, when it was said that you never ask what's wrong with you, but rather what happened to you.
What's happened to you, yes. So there's more understanding. And it is, there's a lot of new literature and new studies that have been done that are helping and contributing. And that's something we try and keep giving our staff, more training, more insight, so that because it is a very challenging world, and to keep reminding staff that our children don't deliberately set out to be annoying. And
you've already mentioned it, Sally, but on top of the fantastic report from the School Inspectorate regarding Northview House, it's done so much good for the children you work with, of course, many of whom perhaps a mainstream education would be inappropriate. What's been, would you say, the key behind Northview's success, not just generally, but indeed potting so many of the children you work with on such a positive trajectory when they leave?
Well, I think it's a very small school. Right now, we have 39 children in it. We have just had permission from the Registrar of Independent Schools in Scotland to increase it to 45 because we have opened a new house, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So in our school, we have permanently 23 members of the education staff. And then every day, we have care staff in the building as well. So we have a lot of adults and we have very small groups. I mean, the children are working maybe in a group of one teacher, 3-4 children possibly. And with that, we also have what we call teaching assistants. And our teaching assistants are actually very well educated. They all have an honours degree in something that is appropriate in our world. So they are very confident in supporting the teachers. And I think that's different because in many mainstream schools, they might have pupil support assistants that might not have that level of confidence that it takes to support the learning and the teaching.
And with that, you're able to communicate with each child on a very individual basis.
Very individual. So they have the opportunity for that very small group, for if it's not working, for one-to-one sessions. And in our secondary school, we have a number of subject-trained teachers. So teachers who, for example, maths, ICT, art, modern studies, history, etc. So we have teachers who know the subject as well and who are able to take the children to the level of the national qualifications. Within Scotland, we talk about nationals, and that goes up to National 5, which is probably the equivalent of English GCSEs, and also Highers in Scotland, which is what they would use as entry to university, or advanced Highers. So that, I think, is a key within our school. And in the primary school, similarly, we have very small classes and, enthusiastic teachers. I mean, we're very lucky. We have excellent teachers. We've got a mix of young and old. So that works very well. And in the school also, for break times, for lunch times, for bringing the kids in, we have the care team. So they're there to support the child should they need it in the classroom as well at break time. So there's a flow, a natural flow for the children. They feel supported by their care team, but not overwhelmed by them. So they're there if they need them. And it really underlines that, the sort of key relationship between care and education. We also, in terms of engaging our children, they will wear uniforms. We do have they wear uniforms. We have high expectations for them. And we make we really try and motivate them and give them the message that, if they get appropriate qualifications, it's a key way of opening doors for them when they leave school.
And it's giving each and every one of them such that extra sense, perhaps for the first time in their lives, that sense of purpose and self-worth.
It is, and I mean, we celebrate their success, if they get a certificate, both in the houses and in the school. But in the school, it's obviously part of that, the natural flow of a school. If they get awards, it's all celebrated. And we have a lot of emphasis, as well as in the academic success, on wider achievements. Our children participate in things like very normal things like the Duke of Edinburgh Award Scheme, John Muir Award. They get various qualifications for their canoeing that we do, and bike maintenance, things like that. That for all children, obviously academic success is not going to be what they get, but they've got that success in the wider achievement world.
And the wonderful opportunities you give them, not just in that sense, but of course, whether it's art or indeed outdoor education programs as well.
Yes, and the outdoor education is another huge part of what we do, and something that the children they all really are very enthusiastic about it. They have secondary children have 1 day a week where they participate with the outdoor education team, doing some seriously, strenuous stuff like mountain biking, rock climbing, all of that. And they get a lot out of it, and they're team building, and they're, collaborating with each other, and having experiences they've never had in their lives before.
Fantastic. Now, we could spend a lot more time talking about this, but I'm afraid we mustn't, Sally. And
yeah, it's okay.
Perhaps if I could ask you to maybe take a step back and look at the sector more broadly here. What would you identify as, Sally, as the main challenges yourselves and the sector will be facing over the next 18 months or so?
Well, I mean, challenges in our world come from all directions. There, at the moment in Scotland, I mean, this is a challenge and it's a plus, but it's kind of a bit of both, really. In Scotland, which is very welcome, there's a big emphasis on continuing care, and that care shouldn't stop for our young people, say, at 18. Now, all our houses, apart from our new one, is registered up until it's from 5 years to 18 years. And that means at the moment a child can stay to their 19th birthday. The Care Inspectorate, which is the regulatory body here in Scotland, want us to increase that. And for the new house, which I mentioned earlier that we opened in October, Moynabrook Farm, it is now registered from 5 to 20, which means that a young person can stay till they're 21. Super. And the Care Inspector is very, very keen that we give this message to the placing authorities that the children can stay. And that for us is going to be a challenge in many ways, because a lot of our actual young people don't really want to stay in a care environment at that point. They have this desire to get back out into communities. The oldest child we have at the moment is 18, and I could see that she will stay maybe for another 18 months, and we welcome that. But it also, having children 18 plus brings other challenges, because they will be seeking freedom in a different way. And their expectations of, within a care home, they still have to follow basically the rules and regulations that we have, and it's quite hard to do that for young adults. So that's probably quite a challenge for us. I mean, we welcome it because our children aren't always ready to get out into the wider community, but it's something that we have to address, and the Care Inspector want it to happen in the actual environment that the child is in already. It's not about saying, well, we've got a through care house. They don't see that as the same thing. So that's a challenge.
Now then, and certainly one that will present a whole new raft of things perhaps no one's even thought of.
Yes.
Because,
exactly.
Which will certainly be something that perhaps we can, going forward here, Sally, talk about as that comes into effect, because I think the more communication on that front, the better for all involved. Now, I know, and this would, I think, be very interesting from a policy point of view here. I know, Sally, obviously you have to work closely as much as you can with relevant local authorities, but how important is that relationship, and how important has it been over the years in building that up?
With the local authorities? Well, I mean, we have 17 different local authorities, and I have to say we do actually have excellent relationships with all the local authorities, and it really is. I mean, in a sense, we talk about working together with the care and education team, but it's another very important aspect is working with the placing authorities. And in some ways, that's about working with the child's individual social workers, psychologists, the multi-professional team. In some cases, it's working alongside the families, because some of the children have quite significant contact with families. And our houses in particular are very good at that. They are very welcoming to the families, who sometimes find it difficult and all the issues that they've had in the past. But so, having them on board, all working together, there's a lot of communication from the houses to social workers, to families as appropriate, depending on what the child's care plan is. So at that level, we have very good relationships with the placing authorities. At a higher level also, we have, I would say, very good relationships. And I mean, in the role that I have, I have communication with the higher levels of the local authorities. And we are in the fortunate position of being well thought of, and in many occasions we would be the first port of call for a local authority, and the local authorities that we work with know quite clearly what type of child would be best placed with us.
Fantastic, and I think it's something that can easily be overlooked by a lot of people from the outside, the importance of this relationship. And perhaps I'll put you on the spot here, Sally. Obviously we've chatted about the continuing care order, but if you were Secretary of State for the day, what is it that you would bring in or reform that you think would really help not just yourselves at Culo Salus, but indeed others doing similar work across the country?
That is quite difficult, but I think the model probably that we, and I think 15 years ago we were quite trailblazers of this model. Because when we started, the kind of ethos was large kind of residential schools, big old-fashioned buildings with lots of kids, with the school and the houses parked in the same environment. And we moved into small houses and the school being separate. And I think that is the right model. And I think now some of the jargon in Scotland has changed. One of the things that we started with was they used to call houses units. Local authorities would say this child doesn't fit, and we said no, we've called it houses because we're now providing a proper, this is their home, we want the children to see that. And just some of the jargon that's around these children. And I'd say again, there's an organisation in Scotland, Who Cares, have been quite instrumental in trying to change the language that is used to describe children. And in terms of and that's a good example of it. They're trying to promote that. They don't talk about the children's units or care visits, just making the jargon let a partner that the child is in care. And so I think the model that we've got is one that I would say that should be emulated. I think the days of large environments with 30 kids in it is not the correct model. I think they need that ethos that is more like, it's almost like a foster placement, a large foster placement, but with a care team that are on shifts and a senior management team that are analysing very closely on a day-to-day basis the needs of each child.
Without a doubt, I think it'd be difficult to find a right thinking person that wouldn't agree with that, Sally. Now, I'm conscious of the time, so I'm afraid we are going to have to begin to wrap up. But before we do, can I just ask, and I think we again would be so interested to know, what are the plans for the next 12 months or so?
Well, we have got our new house, Moynabrook Farm, that was just registered mid-October. So our aim is to fill that up, not too fast. We've actually, our child is moving in today. At the moment, it's a beautiful 60-acre site, and we have a 2-bedded house, and then a 7-bedded house and a 1-bedded cottage in that environment. At the moment, the 2-bedded cottage has got 2 girls in it. We've got 2 boys in the 7-bedded house, and we have a girl moving in today. So our aim is to get that up and running. We're also in the process of moving our outdoor education to that site, so they'll have a very nice purpose-built outdoor education facility with an indoor place for them to do some aspects of the curriculum, and a place to, we'll make a forest walk and things like that. So the outdoor education staff are very excited about that. So we hope to have that ready by about Easter.
So not an unbusy few months ahead of you.
No, and I think the other thing would be within our therapeutic side. I mean, that's a big part of what we do. Our therapeutic team, and one of our team qualified as a BAP play therapist in the course of last year. So we're in the throes of promoting that for our younger children, and that's been a great addition to our therapeutic work that we do, to have a qualified play therapist as part of the team. Well, and so far it's been, she's done excellent work with some of the younger children that we've got, because we do have 3 or 4, 5 to 6-year-olds in our care at the moment.
Well, Sally, let me, on behalf of everybody here, wish you all the best for the year ahead. Certainly a busy one, and hopefully one in which we can catch up with again soon. But for now, Sally, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jonathan.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Sally, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Culo Salus are continuing to raise standards. An exciting year ahead for them, which I look forward to finding out about in due course. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Lord Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now.
Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. But of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshireman, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? Hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament, because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership.
Well, I was used to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians aren't interested, because honestly, as you all know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow chairman, Lord Blunkett, has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
So I was going to say, perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it that moved you from radical Marxist to running the only inner city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around. My family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to it. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed. But, I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through. Although I do know the story, most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office, but who is it that you have?
I'd Che Guevara. Which I always had him over my left shoulder for visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who? I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I felt it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commie would take over.
I'm sure David Bump was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives would never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are calling this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress, since of course you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had include some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised, I may imagine you may not be, at some of the backlash towards, in this country, introducing voter ID for voting?
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like they got in the state to repress. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to Evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
And I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, and I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
Very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let the listeners know what projects you are working on with that, and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. but more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, 7 years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine it could be actually that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to.
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years, and it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure, but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know that's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Lord Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Westminster Arms to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube, and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry, or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.